And we are live.
And so we're back to the next session. I hope you got yourself a coffee or a tea, and now also looking as much forward as we are to this next exciting panel. Or actually, it's more of a fireside chat with science-based startup experts on taking your research to the market. And as mentioned earlier, one of our partners, the DWIH, German House of Innovation and Research, Research Innovation, that way, organized this small session. So I'm handing back over to Katja, who will be moderating the session. And I'll see you later after the session with more information on how we continue. Looking forward to this session. Over to you, Katja.
Thanks so much, Julian, and a warm welcome to the panelists of this session. I will introduce them in a minute, but also to the audience. So do from wherever you are connected. My name is Katja. I'm going to moderate the session. I would to highlight at the beginning, please, to the audience, feel free to ask your questions in the chat. We will take them up in the discussion. This is meant to be an interactive discussion. So please, if you have questions, comments, put them in the chat so that we can take that up a bit later. So let me introduce the panel we have here today, which will talk about how to take your research to the market. We have with us, and I start with Velavan, who's connected, who's actually working normally in Tübingen, but now connected from Vietnam, Hanoi. He is a faculty and group leader at the Institute of Tropical Medicine at the University of Tübingen in Germany, and has led numerous projects on molecular genetics of host pathogen interactions and clinical trials. So he's a really strong researcher, and he's leading also a research center on public health in Vietnam at the moment. That's why he's there. He has published more than 165 articles in peer-reviewed journals, and he also serves as a member of review boards of international funding agencies in the EU and worldwide. But he also mentors startups, and he also thinks about how to bring this fantastic science he's doing into the startup ecosystem. That's why we have him with us. So a lot of greetings to you, Velavan, and yeah, looking forward to your contributions. Our second panelist is Premnath. Premnath is connected from Pune to us. He is the head of the NCL Innovation and Venture Center. So he's currently heading the NCL Innovation Center, which is placed at the CSIR NCL, and he's the founding director actually of the center, with long-standing experience in leveraging enterprises and deep tech startups. He is a technologist, innovation and incubation manager, but he's also a scientist. And actually his journey in technology development and commercialization began with a breakthrough material for hip and knee joint replacement that he co-invented. And that has been implanted in more than 1 million patients worldwide. And he just also asked me, are you a scientist and a researcher? Yes, but I also left the system. So I think we have a good panel here to discuss a bit also these aspects. And last but not least, he has a lot of international experience being an alumnus of MIT in the US, and also being in the Technology Enterprise Scholar in Cambridge in the UK. Last but not least, we are connected with Thorsten Lambertus, who is connected from Munich to us, who is the founder of the MD High-Tech Ventures and head of Neurotech Labs Biogen Germany. Thorsten is a deep tech venture building and tech transfer specialist, as well as a co-initiator of the Innovation and Sustainability Alliance. We know each other from a meeting, I think back 3 or 4 years ago in the US, where he still was heading the Fraunhofer Head program and was introducing this transfer program within the Fraunhofer Society. He left Fraunhofer, and since June 2020, he's also the head of Neurolab Tech's Biogen. So he has experience as a mentor, but also as a founder. So a warm welcome to all of you. As mentioned, we will kick it off with a couple of questions from my side, which I would like to discuss, and then take up the questions from the chat. I just mentioned in my keynote a bit earlier that if one looks at academic entrepreneurship, one has a lot of different mechanisms how to bring the science from the lab to the market. And maybe my first question would go to Thorsten and to Premnath. So founding of spin-offs, licensings to startup, or transforming researchers into startup founders. What is a feasible way for a research institution to commercialize its research, and what should do a research institution, and what's the best way? Maybe Premnath, over to you, and you kick it off.
Okay, happy to be the opening batsman out here. But anyway, We've been engaging with scientists who want to translate their science into products and services for quite some time. And there are many routes to market. So when I don my NCL hat, um, technology reaching the end point, whichever way, is what I would look at. But when I would don my venture center hat, I look at entrepreneurship in particular, right, as a vehicle. Interestingly, in the last few decades, entrepreneurship has become a very important, a much more important way to take things to market, as many of the large corporate R&D centers and so on and so forth in many of the larger economies have started declining in size and scale, and therefore academics have to find their own ways to try and take things out into market. From a scientist perspective, I think everybody wants to see their ideas in use, put to use. They want to see it out there having an impact. The really frustrating thing for many of us is to see that it lies idle in the laboratory and nothing is happening beyond that. So what we have been trying to do is look at a variety of mechanisms and build an ecosystem that can try and facilitate that movement, not necessarily in a spoon-fed manner, but just create that environment which will make it happen, right? And that requires a many different parts. So of course we do still look forward to working with large companies where if there are technologies which are suitable for large companies to take ahead, those are the ones which you would go with large companies. And there are some sectors which are very heavy in investment, the timelines are very different and so on, and you do end up working with large companies. They're not necessarily all suitable for startup environments. On the other hand, there are especially those where a lot more foresight is involved. So one of the key characteristics of startups is this element of foresight of an opportunity, foresight of the tools that will make that opportunity possible and so on. And so whenever there is an element of significant foresight and there's uncertainty around how the future will shape up, that's where some of the larger companies may hesitate entering the field or may think that it's too small for them to enter. And that's where we would look at things like startups and so on to take it ahead as well. Of course, to make that happen, you need a champion. You need a person who believes in that future, right? Of course, Thorsten is one of them here, since he's jumped into the startup world also. But basically, that is an essential component of having a startup. If you don't have that, it's very difficult to build on it further. So I'll come back to more comments as the discussion evolves. So I'll leave the floor to Thorsten now, and then we can discuss more.
Thank you very much. And I would like to stress, Pranad, what you just mentioned. And I think tech transfer is super important. Just bringing up inventions, building new technologies is great. But we need to leverage the potential of it through technology transfer in its various ways in order to create the impact that we need in many ways, from a social perspective, from an environmental perspective, but of course also from a commercial perspective. And since I've been working for 7 years at Fraunhofer, of course, I'm a bit biased that technology transfer is very important, and I've seen various ways of doing that. I think for me, it all comes down to, well, let's take those 3 pillars. Contact research, this is the core of Fraunhofer, working with industry partners together very closely to implement new technologies into running businesses. And the same is also true then for licensing. With MP3, everyone at Fraunhofer is kind of looking for the next MP3, for the next big licensing deal, which is way harder to do than many people sometimes say. If you look at the numbers, there's some nice numbers from the US universities, how many inventions and patents and IP it takes in order to create significant revenues through licensing. This is super hard to do. And I would say those 2 ways are especially relevant when the technology is more or less a mere substitute of a given component in a certain business model. Wow, this was a very theoretic and complex way of putting it. Let's take an example. So if I'm able to improve the production process of a car at whatever big automaker by 5%, then this is something the company can plug into the running system from day one. So if I have technologies that way, I can do that through contract research, I can do that through licensing. But sometimes there's technologies that enable completely new markets, new business models, stuff that we haven't seen before. And we know that corporates are very bad at tapping into that new space and creating new businesses around technologies with new business models. And this is exactly where we need to use startups as those vehicles that explore those new business models that are great bets on how the future are going to look like. And that way we can really enable great technologies to come into life and to create the future. And at some point, those companies might be the incumbents of the future and then replace those who are running business today. So this is my perspective of it, always trying to understand to what extent is the technology already apt to plug it into the current system, or do we need to renew the system and then we need the spin-offs?
Okay, thank you very much. So we talked now to Bremner and Thorsten, who are scientists, but who left the system. Well, I want a question to you. You're into basic research and you're doing a lot of good research, and then you're supporting startups and mentoring. What's your take on it? Shouldn't a researcher focus on research? And why you decided to enter the field as a, I mean, you have a lot to do with the center in Vietnam, and so on, why you decided also to support that field. So maybe your perspective, being a researcher still in the system.
Thank you, Katja, for inviting us here. And it's been a great pleasure for me to share our experiences and expertises to bestow our knowledge to a larger audience. Well, it depends on vision that you overtake and follow a passion, which is driven clearly by a passion. It could be an academics, or it could be a business model, or it could be a small step. What I always call it is like small steps towards big ideas, or small ideas towards big step, or big ideas towards small steps. This is what it comes to my mind, how well you can play it around in terms of a startup. Startup is basically a great place to build your existing skills and ideas, absolutely, with more gaining experiences or functional experiences, a lot of experiences that leads to wisdom and taking a ton of responsibility in this direction. As researchers, what we support startups is startups basically focus on quality, not on quantity. So that means, it means not that they are not working very less, but they work very efficiently. So this is one particular reason why we also facilitate, but also support startups to identify them as potential collaborators in our research studies or in clinical study designs, where we could offer them for the technology readiness level 5 to 7 in terms of field validation studies or diagnostic assays in place to be evaluated at different populations per se, like let's say from Asia to Africa to South Americas to Oceanias. So these are the different perspectives, but there is also a hidden science behind this, which leads us to keep up our passion. At the same time, the startups are, it's a win-win situation for both of us at the end of the day. I mean, as to put it in a nutshell, I think research environment is obviously a must in startup, but normally a collaboration cannot ripe up on a given single day, but it starts with a small corporation, which then blossoms as a collaboration, then it leads to a partnership over time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we've learned it depends on the person, it depends on the technology, which on the readiness level, of course, which way you choose, and then also on partnerships and so on. So if one looks, and I have a lot of discussion, no, what is the best way? So Thorsten, you've been heading the AHEAD program in Fraunhofer. And I always wonder, and I also had in my keynote a bit the talk about startups as a third mission, as it was seen in universities, not a really integrated part of universities in Germany. Do you think really that, what does it take to transform a scientist into a startup founder? Can he learn this? He needs entrepreneurial skills, insight, internal motivation. What you would say? What does it take? And maybe Bremner, you could then add on from your experience from the Indian side.
So yeah, wonderful questions. And just to mention that we acquired a research project back at Fraunhofer where we really experimented with ways of building the right founding teams for spin-off. Because one thing are those people inventing new technologies that have the potential for the spin-off. The second question is, who's the right founding team? And sometimes that's the same and sometimes it's not. And also it depends a little bit on the industry. When you look, for example, at pharma, there's many highly R&D driven spin-offs. So bringing in those business guys for those ventures, that doesn't make sense at all. But there's other spin-offs, of course, where it's more about the business view, using the technology to solve a problem for the customer, understanding the customer, bringing a business model to market that is new. And for that, you need different skills. So back to your question, well, I don't think it comes down to whether you are a scientist or not. It's more like, do you have this entrepreneurial core within you? And this is what we also designed at Fraunhofer. We tried to create a program at the very beginning that made it easy for scientists to discover for themselves whether this core exists. And then you can, through education, help them to understand all the business side, where they sometimes feel like, oh, I fear that. I'm not an expert in that. And I do understand, of course, that fear, but this is something you can learn. But for some people, this isn't the ambition. That doesn't resonate with them. They don't want to talk to customers. They don't want to tailor their technology to the problem out there. They don't want to think about marketing. They don't want to lead a team and build that up that is able to create a business. And once you figure that out for yourself, you can decide purposefully, do I stay a researcher and maybe I hand over my technology to people who are going to found that company, or I think I'm confident that I can make that transition, and then programs like ours can help them to go that. I've seen both. And I've seen also researchers who were entrepreneurial by nature. This does exist, right? And so there's nothing they need to learn. They are just like, they're standing there very authentically on stage and pitching their spin-off idea and their startup idea. And I feel like, well, there's nothing you need to learn right now, and just do it. And we need to encourage them to take that leap. So this is where I would like to differentiate between who's creating the invention, who's creating the founding team, and then really making sure that you find the right people for both.
Okay, thanks, Thorsten. So there are a lot of prejudices, no, about Germans and Indians in the place. So I would like to ask Bremnat, so me being in India, and then people tell me also in Germany, oh, every Indian has entrepreneurial spirits, and Indians have much more entrepreneurial spirit than Germans have. Is that true? Is there entrepreneurial spirit in every Indian in the bloods and veins, or isn't? And how does it look like in NCL? Are you having programs in place? And yeah, how does it look for you? As I said, one has a certain perception of India, no?
Yeah. Well, if you look at entrepreneurship as a whole, and not necessarily only science-based entrepreneurship, India has a very good track record. And part of the reason is that, you know, sometimes entrepreneurship is also driven by the fact that you know, it's also contextual, in the sense that people are you know, somebody jokingly told me that you know, the best time to be an entrepreneur is when your opportunity cost is at the lowest, right? And well, in certain countries, I suppose the opportunity cost can be low as well, right? So anyway, that said, I want to actually focus on, let's just talk a little bit about science-based entrepreneurship. The first thing to remember is that when you talk about entrepreneurship, especially science-led entrepreneurship, you're very often looking at a technology innovation, which is an invention of some kind, or something which has a lot of technology intensity being translated and taken to a product and service in market, right? The real jazzy part, the you know, the one which people are really excited about is probably the 10 or 15% of the early stages where, you know, you can let your creativity come out and so on and so forth, right? After that, it's about just making the product work the same every time with the right accuracies, right? And that is not typically something many scientists enjoy doing, right? Their orientation is to move on to the next best thing, next thing as soon as possible. And that is very often incompatible with the orientation of investors and others who are staking their resources into the project, because they are more interested in the end point. They are not interested in people who are going to come out with an idea every second day, right? They want to take one good idea and move it all the way out there. So that has to be very clear in people's minds. So it's not about being a scientist or not, it's about being having the right orientation for taking it ahead. I agree with Thorsten on that. And you have to eventually think of teams, and every team member has to understand their role in the team. You don't have to be, the favorite picture that I show people of a team is of Kipchoge running the 2-hour marathon with several other elite athletes in front of him breaking the wind for him. The scientist might be one of those unknown names in the front who's breaking the wind for the entrepreneur who's at the back. That's Kipchoge running the race, right? And actually taking it to the finish point of a 2-hour marathon. Of course, that doesn't go well with many scientists. They can't digest the fact that they initiated the idea and somebody else is running the real show. But that's how it is. Most investors actually want to see people who are committed to the end point running the race and are fully committed to it, right? So very often, if there are too many people who are on who have their feet on too many boats, investors are not interested in the company. So in that context, scientists have to take a view on where their role begins and ends depending upon their preferences. You can have scientists who see their role in seeing the entire technology through right till the end point, and they're okay letting go a little bit of excitement that comes up with daily inventions. But there'll be another bunch of people who are not okay with it, and they are better off coming up with those inventions in research environments and passing it on to other people to take it ahead. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So we look at teams, okay, and we would love to build teams which can actually make that happen. I don't think by the way, many startups get created at I differ with others in the thought of TRLs. I don't give as much weightage to TRLs. Many startups get started at very early TRLs because you need to actually see the opportunity well in advance, right? If you have taken it very far in TRLs, it means that you've invested quite a bit. That means somebody else is also betting on the same opportunity. So you might actually be late in the game, right? So you need to be you need to not worry too much about that, but look at the opportunity at large and build it up as it goes. And many of them would do that. So early stages, the scientists and the inventors and the technology developers are very important. They've come up with ideas. In the later stages, they are important, but their role shifts considerably. They need to also be willing. The team has to have people who are willing to make sure that the technology works reliably, is the best in class, and and so on. And also look at technology strategy as a whole and not merely as ideas, right? So you become a strategist in terms of how you want to take that to the market. So just to last point on this, I give this example that imagine if you were to fly, would you fly an aeroplane, okay, which had just been invented, right? Wouldn't you value the people who have taken it all the way to ensure that it doesn't crashes tomorrow, right? So there's a difference in, we do value the people who came ahead, but at the same time, I think it's very important to take it all the way. So we try and find full-time entrepreneurs for our companies. They do not necessarily have to be completely business. I mean, they can be technologists as well, but their orientation should be at the end point. They should believe in the end point. That means the opportunity at the end point, and not necessarily the glory of the invention, but the end point of delivering a product in the market and making delivering returns of whatever kind of soft or hard or tangible or intangible to all the stakeholders in the game. And that's the objective of the entrepreneur over there. So that's what I would stop with. Yeah.
Thanks. So we have first questions coming in, but let us think a bit about the team. So we learned that the team is essential, and because it takes a long, there's a long run till the end. So Velavan, from your perspective, how does a good startup team looks like, and you being quite international, would be an international teams an add-on experience, so and have an international team member, or would it even cause more struggle because to have also bridge intercultural differences? So what does it take for a good team, and would be an international team the better option than a national?
Well, I would say it should be a mix of an international team, and we should work hand in hand together. This is what I would put it up as. And based on my experience, what I would say is it always starts with an individual level normally, and then it moves down to a kind of institutional level progress, and then it goes into an infrastructural or an organizational level in terms of building these capacities step by step. But this is, again, I say it's a way how you make your steps, or how you do your strategy to build a product that someone is clearly interested in, that you know that this particular product is going to make it to the market at some way during some time. You should have a very good strategy. Many startups are failing because of weak strategy in building a product, because they do not validate their ideas before or during the development period, for example, or poor planning, or in terms of poor management, in terms of poor leadership. To differentiate, just differentiating a product and a service, this is something simple, but they should try to differentiate a product, what is a service. So if they could find a balance in this, they could be much more successful. In terms of leadership is one clear thing, as far as one of our colleagues has said this, the strategy and the management teams basically play a larger role. And how do you build such a team, not at a national level, but not even as a continental level, but it should be a global level. It should be a global partnerships. It should not be restricted to one country, even although it might be restricted to one country at given some time point, maybe during the small steps towards big ideas, as I say here, this might be okay. Or when you have a small ideas towards big step, then you should think global. So this is how we should approach this particular component. But internationally and nationally speaking, it does not matter how best you are going to give, how much you are committed to take your product to the next level, how much you are dedicated to make this happen. So these are the small nitty-gritties that basically defines this picture, how well a successful startup gets established, first regionally, then it goes a bit broader globally. So to give it in a nutshell, I would say you need obviously a good partnership per se, which is the strength. Like we used to say, like the strength of the team is a strength of an individual, and the strength of an individual is the strength of the team. Yeah. So this goes hand in hand. Over.
Thanks so much. And I think so, but from our experience, one has to get along, one has to get to know each other, and then it works. We have here an interesting question, and I don't know if the person who raised the question is coming from India or Germany. That's why the question goes to you, Thorsten and Bremnat. So do we have any platform for a researcher to talk, communicate, or understand nuances of entrepreneurship, covering licensing, economics, customer acquisition, pitching, fundraising, etc. So let's suppose I'm sitting in a small town in India, or I'm sitting in a small town in Germany. I'm a researcher, and I have a great idea, I think, and I want to talk to somebody. Whom I need to address to? Thorsten.
Well, I have to say 10 years ago would have been hard for me, at least for Germany and for Europe, to tell you where to go. Nowadays, there's plenty of support programs for this. This is, by the way, all the topics that have been mentioned here. This is what we covered in the ad program. This was a full-fledged program, and it was tailored to your needs, and it still is tailored to your needs. Whatever you want to learn, wherever there's a gap between where are you right now and the skills you need in order to take a spin-off to the market, this is what we would provide you. And right now, when you look at many research organizations, there are such programs with high quality in place. And there's even programs that are not linked to any university or research organization that do this. So I can talk at least for the ecosystems here in Germany and most countries in Europe. There's great programs everywhere. You just need to take the first step and really apply and take the leap and go into it. But I think there's various options today.
Well, I'm not. If I don't have access to NCL, I'm sitting
Well,
somewhere. I'm not sitting in Pune.
No, by the way, there is now an extensive network of incubators in India, and many of them are science-based incubators. For example, in the biotech space, BIRAC has set up several incubators in different domains. Those are all available, but there are also other initiatives happening. For example, I've just put a link in the chat box, but perhaps you can transmit it externally also, which is recently there's a program which we are running with the Atal Innovation Mission and the Gates Foundation, which is called AIM Prime, which is focused on science-based deep tech startups. And this is actually a global faculty run and mentor run event, which is focused on basically science-based enterprises. And there's a lot of resources available. Even by the way, even places like Venture Center in Pune, all our mentoring activities are open to everybody. It's not limited to our incubators. So we actually have mentees in more than 15 cities right now from Pune. So that is in the works, and it's actually something which is available in many different ways. So people are welcome to reach out, and we will find a way to help them, especially with advice, mentoring, and so on and so forth. There are multiple forums which we can direct them to. If they're specialized in specific domains, we can also direct them to incubators which are specialized in those domains. Since the person mentioned IP and so on and so forth, I just want to give you a few quick examples. We run something called an IP facilitation center. We have 3 patent agents in-house advising startups and innovators who come from all parts of India. Okay, we have something for regulations. For example, we have a regulatory facilitation center which is looking at roadmaps for startups, for especially some of the heavily regulated products, because getting clarity in that is very, very key to getting your story right, timelines right, your investment plan right, and so on and so forth. In AIM Prime itself, there's a cohort which is actually being mentored for fundraising and pitching as of now, and that was nationally drawn. It's a Atal Innovation Mission related program, so it was nationally drawn as well. So these are all available. I can direct you to more. And by the way, for funding, Venture Center has a freely available database for everybody. It's funding.venturecenter.co.in, which tracks all funding sources from various different grant agencies, government related agencies, even some of the venture capital funds, and so on and so forth. And these are used by many of our startups as well. So these are available. It's now a much smaller world than what it used to be before.
And one can even have a look at the large platform startup in India as a first try. But good to know that NCL is available for everybody. Yeah. Here's a question, a very specific one for Velavan. So is there one-to-end player in clinical research who helps people to go to the submission to authorities like the WHO?
Well, we don't need to talk about WHO at this level, but we should talk about your regional and country level, who is a competent body who might be able to approve your clinical study or a clinical research that you undertake. In India, it should be an ICMR, or the Indian Council of Medical Research in this case, followed by the Ministry of Health.
CDSCO, yeah.
CDSCO, all right. Once the national regulatory authorities approve those things in place, and a clinical trials or a clinical study has to be obviously been should be registered and should be, and it should follow all the GCP, GCLP, ICH guidelines per se. And then you may approach not directly to WHO, maybe you may approach an FDA or an EMA for a European medicine agencies, or if you are in Germany for medical products, it's BfArM, and other regulatory agencies for the diagnostic products and drug-related materials per se, who may provide an approval which takes you to a European level where you can claim in EMA, which is in European medicines agencies, where you can claim for the particular product or the innovation that you have been approved for use in Germany, but also in India and so on and so forth. So it goes a bit at the next level per se. But definitely you need, before that, you need to validate some of your products, but there are also agencies which are funded through WHO, but also through Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, sorry, Bill Gates Foundation as of now, there is a non-for-profit institution such as FIND, which is Future Innovative New Diagnostics, which is in Geneva. So they may take you up, they may take up your product, and they may circulate this product, and they may validate this product, and they give a word of mouth how well in terms of specificity and sensitivity and limit of detection, analytical sensitivity, and so on and so forth, that your product is capable of performing in different diagnostic settings, in different field settings, in different countries, in different populations per se, thereby providing a kind of pre-approval for your product. For example, this is the case for COVID-19. For example, in case of COVID-19 diagnostics, nothing was in place in January 2020. We did not have anything. We have all in-house PCRs, in-house things in place, and everyone was running around a diagnostic assay per se. And then WHO now basically find in Geneva, which is driven by WHO, use them to validate these tests, and which of those companies are capable enough of having a CE approval, but also an FDA and EMA approval, thereby taking it further to commercialization per se. Over.
Okay, thank you so much. So we tackled a bit the question of IPR and equity, I would say. So I mean, I'm quite aware of the German system, but maybe Thorsten, you've been with Fraunhofer. How would it have looked like in Fraunhofer? Where is the intellectual property staying, and what would you take, or would you have taken in Fraunhofer the equity in the startups you supported?
Wow, that's a big one. I can tell you we are running a WhatsApp group with some tech transfer officers from Europe, and we're discussing that more or less intensively every day, how to do that right. Because for me, this is critical. The regulatory environments in different countries are different. The regulatory environment in different research organizations are very different. And the deal, how you construct it from a licensing perspective, but also from an equity perspective, is highly relevant for the path it can actually take to grow and succeed at the very end. So for Fraunhofer, of course, since the IP is the asset that all the institutes need in order to finance themselves, this is the first kind of negotiation you have. Do you use a certain IP to do contract research and to license it maybe at some point to incumbent, or do you use it through an exclusive license for certain application fields for spin-off, and thereby lock it for many years to some extent, right? To make it pretty simple. And so the IP lies or belongs to Fraunhofer. So whenever you want to license that, you need to negotiate with Fraunhofer. The heads of the individual institutes, there's 74 right now, if I'm still up to date. So they have a very heavy say on how the deal is going to look like here, because they have the P&L, the profit and loss statements, more or less for their institute. And so from an equity perspective, what we've seen is that the equity is, for most cases, in between 10 and 25%. And then you have a licensing deal on top, and this can vary very much. And what I have to say now, without going into too many details, those spin-offs that actually work had a pretty good combination, a VC-friendly, venture capital-friendly combination of equity and licensing deal. And there's some who had maybe a great potential from a technological and from a business model and the team perspective. But since the deal itself was so heavily ill-constructed, it never flew. And so this is exactly where the magic happens, just something that is VC-friendly, if this is the path you want to take. There's, of course, other ways to finance and to grow companies. But I think this is where we lose a lot of potential in Germany overall, and I think in many other countries as well.
Yeah, so it's in the German system, no? That's research developed in the public funded research institutions. The IP is always staying with the research institution and not with the person who did the research. So there's a law also on that, and then one has to see in the licensing deals and the equity. How does the situation look like in India? Is it the same, or are you following more individual approach?
Yeah, as far as the IP policy goes, in most publicly funded institutions, labs, institutions, large institutions, the policy is that the institution owns the IP, right? So, India has had this from way before, including, I mean, in fact, the universities have owned it, but there are, of course, a large number of institutions who don't have a policy at all. Okay, and that's a problem. Okay, but but the major ones you will find will have a policy where the institution owns it. Okay, and it's very clear over there. We don't have the similar one as the professor's privilege in Sweden or elsewhere. So we have a very simple system, and this goes even before the Bayh-Dole Act. So we are in India, I think we are okay as far as that is concerned. And that, I think, is the right way to go. From the UK experience, at least it tells that the clarity of decision making is a little better. You don't want to have multiple inventors pulling the horse in multiple directions in such a case. Now, as far as commercializing it is concerned, there are equity arrangements are relatively new in India. The IITs were the first ones to have arrangements where equity arrangements were used with startups in return for intellectual property of some kind. In other government institutions, there was a very important government notification dating back to 2009, which enabled this. This was from the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, which allows this to happen in principle. But to make it happen in practice is a different matter. We have the provision to make it possible in principle, but there are practical difficulties. One of the chief difficulties being that most of our research institutions are not-for-profit institutions which have tax benefits, and unfortunately holding equity in private entities will basically not allow them to have those tax benefits. So the only way to solve that problem is to have an intermediary, which is an incubator or another entity of that kind, right? So that's so some of the IITs, many of those institutions, and also institutions, a few CSIR institutions have managed to do that, and we do have spin-off companies where equity there are indirect benefits to the research institution linked to equity. Okay, now as about structuring goes and cap table goes, the share progression tables go. The general rule in India is that most investors wouldn't like to see so-called silent participants in the company, right? Or people who are having shares, but who the investors cannot go and catch their neck and wring it, so to say. So in that context, people who are silent in the game have to be as small as possible in terms of shareholding. So I am a big votary for the fact that in research institutions and so on and so forth should moderate their expectations and keep it as minimal as possible. Please remember that this is not, as a whole around the world, tech transfer is not a viable option for self-financing of research. Okay, nowhere in the world. Stanford shows you, the whole lifetime earnings of say $2 billion, whereas their annual research expenditure will be more than $2 billion. So let's not fool ourselves, right? So what we are trying to do here, but that said, the economic value of research that is created around you is enormous, right? The diffusional value of it. Even if a research institution is getting 2%, the remaining 98% is out there in the economy, right? So I think what one has to look at as research institutions is that, right? If you want to put your neck in the game, you have to be ready to get it ringed. Okay, otherwise it is not going to work. So I think it's very so I would recommend, and that's what we like to do, is equity arrangements should be moderated in such a way that it helps the company raise money. Very often startups start at a point where there aren't too many takers for the technology. Okay, and that's where the foresight part comes in. If it is something which is very hot and of need for, from many different companies, or everybody sees value in it, then it's a different ball game, right? In the inception of startups, very often there aren't too many takers, and so one needs to take that into consideration, and it builds up over a period of time. The value builds up in the company as people work very hard to take it ahead. So in places like NCL, we use a combination of we use equity to replace only any upfront or milestone fees. Okay, we don't use it for our running royalty components, and we have done a little bit of thinking and studying of various models around the world to try and see what we could use as much as, but it's not perfect. We have struggled with those arrangements in terms of how to make it happen. It works, but it's not ideal for startups to raise money. The best situation is to strengthen the arms of your startups as much as possible, with the view of helping them raise as much innovation funding as possible. And many researchers need to see that as a value add, in the sense, you know, after all, your ideas are attracting a lot of resources, right? And it's your ideas that people are building upon. What more do you think you should have, right? So I think we have to take a longer term view of this, and that's what we have been advocating in India for many of these deals. Most IITs would take single digit equity arrangements, okay, in their startups, and they would give privileges and preferences if the inventors involved in the company or students are involved in the company, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's an important takeaway, that incubators, innovation centers in science institutions are not having less royalty and not benefit, or are not taking out benefit of these things, and they support you, and you have other equity than you would have in a private incubator, an incubator which is not placed in university. Velaban, over to you. So you've been into science. So how relevant are public support mechanisms in the whole game? And do you see any gaps taking the science from the research in the support mechanisms we have in place at the moment in Germany?
Well, in terms of public support, we always have some kind of SMEs where these SMEs are taken forward from the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, where BMBF is potentially providing active support in terms of startup grants, or also in terms of specific states. They also provide in terms of seed grants to the startup companies to flourish and grow. But one small pitfall, if an Indian wants to make a startup in Germany, is it's bit there are a kind of a bit of bit odd things that might be also has to be considered. Like you need to have a seed money of 25,000 euros to start up a GmbH. And more importantly, also there is also, you have to get to know the language barrier. This is also one of the barrier that you should be able to consider in terms of looking into the German laws, how system works and things like this. But also there is also quite some to have Indian startups in Germany and things like this. I had some experiences with colleagues, which this is why I'm just trying to say, portray all these things. Because startup companies also needs visas to enter Germany, and unlike other countries such as France and Poland within Europe provide startup visas, whereas Germany do not give such startup visas in place. So these are some of the pitfalls. Nevertheless, the financial opportunities in terms of growing up is obviously existing. This is clear through public bodies, but how well you grow without the other hand of the support, this still remains to be elucidated. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we come slowly to an end, but maybe one last question to Bremnat and Thorsten from the chat. So we've learned, and I also know we have a lot of funding systems in place from the public side, no? Especially for early and for seed funding. So there is, as well as in Germany, as India, there's a lot of support in place. But how often are venture capitalists interested in science-based startup? Are you having problems finding them? Would they jump on your project? So, and Villavan is always already saying no. But yeah, maybe a short insight into Germany and India in a nutshell. I think that's a very interesting question, because we know all, and we always talk about these wonderful public funding mechanisms which are out there. But what about venture capital?
Yeah. So first of all, the public funding for startups is relatively a new thing in India. It only has a history of about 10 to 15 years. Before that, the government was not able to direct any funds to any private entities at all. But that said, there has been it's been extremely important. It led by the Department of Science and Technology and the Department of Biotechnology, which has created a very very important continuum of early stage funding. In the Indian context, it's very important to remember. By the many big companies that you hear of from India in the last generation are all family businesses. Okay, the only way to start a company was by putting in your own resources. And in most knowledge-based sectors where scientists and engineers are active, these are all places which, these are all domains where there are first-generation entrepreneurs. And those first-generation entrepreneurs do not have those deep pockets to get those companies off the ground. And in those cases, you will find that if you don't have the resources, you will obviously gravitate towards those sectors where the investment is lower and the time to getting cash positive is shorter. And though that happens to be IT, ITES, and so on and so forth, right? And it's not surprising that that has taken off, right? Now, in the last 10, 15 years, there's a lot of government support coming into early stage funding. For example, BIRAC has a whole sequence of funding options, right? From very small fellowships to discover problems, to proof of concept, to advancing it, to clinical trials, field trials, which changes from grants to matched funding to equity and so on and so forth, right? That has filled up a very important gap for first generation entrepreneurs to take a leap, and that has indeed created a lot of pipeline. And during COVID, for example, it was very clear that a lot of the entrepreneurs who contributed in a big way came out of that generation, and they're all first generation entrepreneurs, creating a lot of that buzz that you saw, at least. Now, but there's still gaps. So for example, in India, there's a big gap in roughly, say, it's about, if you're trying to raise something just below $500,000 to maybe, from about, say, $200,000 to $500,000, you will have a gap over there where you will have to rely on angel investors, high net worth individuals, and so on and so forth. If you're able to cross over to be able to demand and get to a point where you're raising in millions, there are lots of venture capital firms in India. Okay, the difficulty is, and which is a genuine thing, which is I don't blame them for it, is that if you can make money while with the same kind of returns with taking less risk, you would do it, right? And in certain economies, it is possible, like India. So it is not surprising that they would look at other opportunities as well. But that said, those opportunities are diminishing. Okay, and the world's venture capital funds are also looking at India seriously. So there are funds available. Very often it's a case of building an investable business proposal, right? And getting it ready to that stage. And that's where some of the incubators fit in. That is, they need to get them that far where it is an investable business case. And of course, it involves a lot more work when you're dealing with scientists, ironing out the creases and getting them polished. but that said, it is possible, it is happening. Interestingly, there are investments. We have investments even surprisingly from angel investors in even therapeutics, okay, which is not normally a case in India. Devices and diagnostics have taken up quite a bit. Right now, there's a wave in agro, okay, which I think will it'll first go to some of the low-hanging fruits and then to the next set of waves. In our startups last financial year, and by the way, remember that we are an early stage incubator, have raised 150 crores during COVID. Okay, so it is I think it is possible. It is just that we have to also remember that investors are looking at a certain ticket size to make their investments viable, right? And the ticket size is roughly the same whether it's in India or in the US, right? They put in the same effort, I think, or the cost to them is the same, at least. So they don't necessarily look at very small ticket sizes, so they need you to get to that point. So it's the government's job, it's the job of all the incubators to create a pipeline to take you that far, right? If there is enough of a pipeline, I think there should not be a problem getting investments from venture capital firms, right? Of course, there are sectoral preferences. There are other sectors which are sort of competing with you. You need to, in which case, startups have to look for value wherever they find it in the world. Okay, and we encourage that as well. It's not an issue for us. You know, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. You go where beauty is seen, right? And you make the most of it. It doesn't matter. But there are other limitations. For example, you'll find that any investments in India about $20 million invariably come from foreign sources. Okay, so you end up. So you know that these are the norms. So I think you have to know how to play the game, probably. Thorsten, over to you.
Thorsten, would you say draw the same picture for Germany?
Yeah, it's quite similar. And again, 5 years back, it would have been a different answer. So the ecosystem of venture capital for deep tech and science-based companies is evolving, but it's still immature. And I found it very funny after we have been able to build and scale all that internet companies, e-commerce, platforms, whatever things. Those investors then turned 2-3 years ago to deep tech in order to keep their competitive edge and find great deals, but with very limited experience in that space. And so they approach people like me at Fraunhofer, basically asking, where's great deals? We want to invest. And I said, like, so what are you investing in? Yeah, deep tech. Okay, how do you define deep tech? 90% of the deep tech spin-offs from Fraunhofer, for example, are hardware-based. I would ask, do you also invest into hardware? No, of course not. We are talking more about AI, machine learning kind of things, more complex software businesses. And so I already knew 90% of my spin-offs are out of the game already, right? And so this is where I see there that we need really those who understand the business of taking technologies from the lab to market, who understand the team structure around that, who have the right deep pockets for that, who also understand how to de-risk technology, not only to de-risk markets. And I have to say, it's called venture capital. And to some extent, I feel like this industry is transitioning into becoming more bankers, where the venture is very small and very easy to calculate portfolios they are building up with as little risk as possible. So I would love to see more really venturous venture capital funds, at least in Germany and in Europe, but I think it's evolving.
It's evolving, but venture capital is not venture capital any longer. Yeah, I think our hour is over, and I think we could continue discussing. So thanks so much for this very inspiring discussion. I think we tackled a lot of questions, IPR, venture capital. We talked about the ideal team. We've been talking about what does it take to be a good science entrepreneur, but we also had a look into the funding systems, where are the gaps, and we also had the perspective of a researcher who told us why one should take that and how one support it. So thanks so much to you, Elawan, Bremner, Thorsten. I think we should continue the discussion. Really inspiring. I've learned a lot. I hope also our audience, we could answer a couple of questions. So thanks so much. if you're interested in the topic of science-based startup, yeah, reach out to GINSA, but also to the German Center for Research and Innovation, who is on the topic. We have upcoming 28th of October, a nice little event, and we take you on a tour around the globe, 60 minutes, and have a look at 5 innovation systems with our partners from our houses abroad. But yeah, thanks so much for this inspiring session. And then I would hand over to you and back to Berlin. Julian.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katja, for this really great session. I found it really interesting. You touched so many points, and yeah, now it seemed that this 1 hour, the 60 minutes just flew by. And yeah, really interesting. So thank you very, very much.